In the blossoming culture wars over the COVID-19 vaccine, Texas has brought us another chapter. Specifically, last week, Governor Greg Abbott signed into law a bill that prohibits businesses from requiring their customers to be vaccinated against COVID under penalty of losing government contracts or potentially losing their license, depending on what state regulators want to say. This latest chapter in the so-called vaccine passport debate can be a little bit confusing, so we're going to answer a few questions, try to clarify a few things. In the meantime, go ahead and hit the like and subscribe button over there. Drop a comment, send me an email if there's something that you want to see for the next video, and let's go ahead and get started. Here's your roadmap. We're going to talk about 4 basic topics related to this. Number 1, what is the new law? Specifically, what does it say? That's Senate Bill 968. Number 2, what was the previous situation, right? There was this executive order that was handed down in April. What did that say? It was a little bit narrower, not quite so far-ranging as this new bill. What's the difference between the two? Number 3, what are the consequences of this for the state kind of writ large, right? Surprise, surprise, this this law is at odds with what the national authorities are saying. And number 4, what are the consequences of this for your small business? What can you do to stay in compliance? Do you need to comply? What are your options? What can you do? How do you move forward from here? If you look at this Senate Bill 968, it's pretty wide-ranging, sweeping. It touches on all kinds of stuff. But among the other provisions in this bill is this prohibition on vaccine passports. Now, this is something that's become a big subject of debate. I'm not going to get into that. I'm just going to talk about what the actual law says. So there are a couple specific prohibitions in this law. So one is that it prohibits any governmental entity in Texas from issuing a vaccine passport, vaccine pass, or other standardized documentation that confirms a person has had a COVID vaccine or has recovered from COVID, or et cetera, et cetera. The only way that you can publish and share that information is for health purposes. That's a mandate on governmental entities in Texas. That's the first part of it. The other part of it prohibits businesses from requiring any customer of that business to provide any documentation certifying the customer's COVID-19 vaccine. So that can include that little white card that you get when you've actually gotten the vaccine. A business cannot ask you to provide that vaccine card in order to gain access. The penalty for a business failing to comply with this ban on vaccine passports is that the business is not eligible to receive a grant or enter into a contract payable with state funds. In addition, the bill directs state agencies to ensure that businesses in Texas comply with the prohibition. These state agencies may require compliance with the prohibition as a condition to issue a license, permit, or other state authorization. So if you're applying to get a license from the state of Texas and you're not complying with this, never mind if you're not taking state money, you're not contracting with the state, you're not doing any of that stuff. If you're just applying for a license, the agency that is your licensing authority could say, hey, you're not complying with this law on vaccine passports, so you don't get a license. That's pretty significant. Now, notably, the bill does include a kind of exclusion that says, look, we're not prohibiting businesses from taking COVID-19 screening and sanitization procedures. So like, for example, businesses continue to take your temperature when you come in, require you to sanitize your hands, all that kind of thing. So let's talk about the second topic, which is what was going on previously. What is this a change from, right? So about a month ago, April 18th, Governor Abbott issued this executive order that restricted mask policies of governmental entities. So think back to, we'll go on our time machine even further. We'll go back to the beginning of March, where Governor Abbott issued this executive order proclaiming that Texas was open 100% and removing face covering requirements. As part of that executive order, Governor Abbott said that local cities and municipalities may not require face coverings. Well, okay, those cities and municipalities could still continue to require face coverings in their capacity as a landlord, right? So this is a difference between the city of San Antonio passing an ordinance that says face coverings are required in San Antonio on the one hand, versus on the other hand saying, look, we can't do that, but we can require face coverings as our landlord, as our private business. So if you go into a city building, you could have to cover your face. Well, okay, fine. This April 18th thing did away with all of that, right? This April 18th thing said, look, face coverings are out. and all government entities of the state of Texas can no longer require face coverings or restrict activities related to COVID. And that included, at least after June 4th, I believe it was, schools. It included all other governmental entities. Well, okay, so that's fairly, wide-ranging, but this new law, Senate Bill 968, goes even further. So this imposes on private businesses a new requirement that you cannot require proof of vaccination, where previously you were just talking about face coverings with government entities. Now you're kind of branching out and imposing restrictions on the private sector. So previously in April, if you weren't, government contractor, like something like that, you didn't really care about any of that. Well, now we've got a whole new thing that does apply to a whole lot of private businesses, because a lot of private businesses do some business with the government. They do some business with the state, or maybe they get grants, or maybe they're subject to licensing renewals or that kind of thing. So these are all potentially, at least, huge departures from the existing law. So the third area I want to very briefly talk about, and I don't want to get too much into politics here, is what are the consequences of this for the state of Texas? Well, there's a few things, right? Number one, there are various other states and various other countries that are implementing vaccine passports, right? So if you live in the state of Texas and every Texas governmental authority is prohibited from issuing vaccine passports, that means if you want to travel outside of the state and you want to go somewhere that does require vaccine passports, well, hell, you might have to get another COVID vaccine in order to prove to them that you have been vaccinated, even though you obviously already have. If you don't have that little white card from the CDC, or maybe they do or don't accept it, who knows? But this totally forecloses the possibility of any kind of reciprocity or anything like that of other jurisdictions that would require or perhaps recognize a vaccine passport if it were issued by Texas. So that's all out. The other potential consequence of this comes to interstate commerce, and some noise has been made about the cruise ship industry coming out of like Galveston specifically. So back in the early days of the COVID pandemic, if you remember, cruise lines were totally shut down by the federal government. And this is probably a smart thing to do, because if we learned anything from the cruise ship that was anchored off the coast of China and like everyone got sick because COVID was spreading through the air ducts, right? That cruise ships are sort of uniquely situated as a vector for COVID. Well, okay, the federal government recently allowed cruise ships to restart based on certain, vaccine requirements and and, they could require passengers to. Well, so if the state of Texas tries to say, look, Port of Galveston, you can't cooperate with this in any way, et cetera, who knows? Maybe that traffic starts coming out of New Orleans or, somewhere, Florida or wherever, somewhere else instead. Maybe those cruise lines decide that, hey, maybe Texas isn't so friendly to us after all. Now, there are various other ways that this could conceivably come back to bite the state of Texas in terms of business, commerce, industry, that kind of thing. But the legislature and the governor have clearly made the decision that they believe the freedom accorded by not having vaccine passports is worth the trade-off, so I guess we'll see what happens. So I saved the best for last. Number 4, how is this going to affect your small business in particular? Senate Bill 968 bans vaccine passports. What do you need to know starting tomorrow? Well, there's a couple of things. The first question that you need to ask yourself, do you do any business with the state of Texas? Do you do business with a government entity that is underneath the political subdivision of the state? If you don't get any government grants, you don't get any government money, you don't buy things from them, sell things from them, bump into them from time to time, you don't do any business with the government, any business with government agencies, anything like that, then you can probably do whatever you want, right? Because the only penalties for this law are lack of government contracts, lack of government grants, and then maybe some licensing. We'll talk about that in just a second. But the main teeth of this are people who are connected to the government. They're connected to the state of Texas. They're government contractors. They do some business with them. They sell them, paper or hats or cleaning supplies or whatever it may be. Those are not government entities. Those are private sector businesses that do business with all kinds of different things. But one of their clients is the state of Texas. Well, you have to comply or that contract is going to get pulled. So let's talk about the license and regulatory bit. This is interesting. The universe of businesses that provide some sort of service or contract or business with the state of Texas and the government, that's a lot of businesses. But compared to the number of businesses that are licensed or regulated in the state as a whole, that second group is a lot bigger. That's a whole lot more people. And the two are treated sort of differently in the law. So let's talk about that for just a second. So the government grants and government contracts and all of that, It's mandatory language. It's shall language. It says you ain't getting that money if you're requiring vaccine passports, period. Not happening. Sorry, come back next time. The other part says that state agencies shall enforce the law, but it says that they may require compliance as a condition of issuing a permit or a license or etc. Now, does that mean that state agencies have this much discretion or this much discretion? I don't know. I guess we'll find out. Also, does that apply to reissuances of license, or is that just for new businesses? So if I want to renew my law license next year and continue to practice law, which I probably want to do, does that mean that I have to comply with this mandate to renew my law license? Does that mean every professional who wants to renew their license anytime in the next year, 2 years, 5 years, whenever you're up for renewal, does that mean that you have to comply if that agency says that you can, or is it only for new licenses? It's not clear. So thank you guys again for tuning in. Like I said, your takeaway is Texas has banned vaccine passports. If you do business with the state government of Texas and you want to keep getting that sweet, sweet government money, you're going to have to comply with 968, any contracts, grants, anything like that. That is all now conditioned on not requiring vaccine passports. In addition, if you are a licensed or a regulated profession in the state of Texas, not even profession, licensed or regulated business, in order to get more licenses and registrations, you may be required to comply. So keep an eye on what your regulator's saying. There's a lot of detail there still to come out. Who knows where this will settle? A court challenge is probably not inconceivable, but we'll see. Stay tuned for any further developments. Again, drop a comment, like, and subscribe over there. That helps tell me what content you want to see. Thank you guys again for tuning in, and be safe.